This was the view a little less than 3 hours ago as Frank Rubio, Sergey Prokopyev, and Dmitri Petelin gathered at the hatchway to their Soyuz MS-23 spacecraft and then floated inside, closing the hatches behind them to begin the process of preparing for an undocking from the International Space Station just 22 minutes from now to begin the journey home and complete a 371-day, 157 million mile mission. Welcome here in Mission Control in Houston and the Johnson Space Center. In the International Space Station Flight Control Room, you see the replay that occurred at about 11:41 p.m. Central Time, 12:41 a.m. Eastern Time, as the hatch to the Prishal module, that is the docking port for the Soyuz MS-23 spacecraft, was first closed, followed just a minute or two later by the closing of the hatch to the Soyuz MS-23 spacecraft. The three departing crew members, Rubio, Prokopyev, and Petelin, are suited up in their Sokol launch and entry suits. They have completed leak checks on their suits and leak checks at the hatchway and the vestibule between the Soyuz spacecraft and the Prishal module that resides mated to the top of the MLM, the multipurpose laboratory module, the Naoka module, on the space-facing side, on the Earth-facing side of the Russian segment of the International Space Station. Once the crew members were on board, they began communications checks and systems checks with the flight controllers at the Russian Mission Control Center in Korolyov outside Moscow. You're looking right now at the scene here in the Space Station Flight Control Room here at the Johnson Space Center in Houston. On console at this hour is Flight Director Chris Dobbins. There's actually a loss of signal and a brief gap in communications capability to the International Space Station right now. We'll pick up communications a few minutes from now through our tracking and data relay satellite system. All of the undocking preparations have gone perfectly. The hooks on the ISS side of the docking interface with the Soyuz spacecraft, they were opened a couple of hours ago, and Soyuz leak checks, as I mentioned, were completed a short time ago, setting the stage for the undocking command that will initiate the opening of the hooks on the Soyuz side of the docking interface. The hooks will open or begin to open at 2:53 a.m. Central Time, 3:53 a.m. Eastern Time. It'll take about 90 seconds for those hooks to fully open, after which springs on both sides of the docking interface will push off against one another, allowing physical separation, the actual undocking itself, of the Soyuz spacecraft. The undocking will push away Soyuz at a rate of about 12 tenths of a meter per second. That opening rate will be increased through two separation burns of the Soyuz thrusters that will occur within minutes after the undocking itself. The undocking is scheduled at 2:54 and 30 seconds a.m. Central Time, 3:54 and 30 seconds a.m. Eastern Time. The two separation burns monitored by the Russian flight controllers at the Russian Mission Control Center outside of Moscow in the town of Korolyov will be followed by the deorbit burn itself. The deorbit burn will take place at 5:24 and 9 seconds a.m. Central Time, a 4-minute, 39-second retrograde firing, a braking maneuver, if you will, to slow the Soyuz down by 128 meters per second, allowing it to drop out of orbit to begin its 54-minute descent through the atmosphere and towards the landing site in south-central Kazakhstan. Once the deorbit burn is complete, about 23 minutes later, there will be a pyrotechnic firing of the separation of the three sections of the Soyuz spacecraft, the module separation occurring at 5:51 and 58 seconds a.m. Central Time, 6:51 and 58 seconds a.m. Eastern Time. The modules will be separated, the orbital module, which is the top section of the Soyuz, the descent module, where the crew is strapped into their seats at this hour, that's the center section, and the lower section, which is the instrumentation and propulsion module. The only section that survives the heat of reentry, of course, is the descent module with the crew strapped on board, with Sergey Prokopyev, the Soyuz commander, in the center seat, flanked to his left by Dmitri Petelin, and to his right by NASA's Frank Rubio, the record holder for the longest single spaceflight in American history, at 371 days, eclipsing the former mark of 355 days previously held by Mark Vande Hei. Following the separation of the modules, about 3 minutes later, the descent module will reach the point of entry interface at an altitude of 62 miles. That will be the first traceable senses of gravity pulling at the crew members' bodies for the first time in 371 days. The entry interface will occur at an altitude, again, of about 400,000 feet, 62 miles above the Earth, and that will be followed just 2 minutes later by the entry of the spacecraft into the plasma regime, where peak heating begins on the vehicle, with temperatures around the Soyuz reaching about 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit, creating a plasma trail behind the spacecraft with its heat shield in the direction of travel, repelling that heat and allowing a safe entry into the lower regions of the atmosphere towards the landing site in Kazakhstan. Once the vehicle exits the plasma regime, the crew will feel maximum G loads on their bodies, about 4 to 5 Gs, at an altitude of 22 miles above the Earth. That will occur at just after 6 a.m. Central Time, followed at 6:03 and 13 seconds a.m. Central Time by a command to open up the parachutes. That will be the final major milestone on the route home for the crew on board the Soyuz MS-23. Landing at the site, the typical site just to the southeast of the remote town of Zhezkazgan in Kazakhstan, is scheduled at 6:17 and 33 seconds a.m. Central Time, 7:17 and 33 seconds a.m. Eastern Time, which will be 5:17 p.m. at the landing site in Kazakhstan, just about an hour and 53 minutes before sunset. During this marathon mission for Rubio, Prokopyev, and Petelin, again, they spent 371 days in space and aboard the International Space Station. They completed 5,936 orbits of the Earth, a mission that will have spanned 157,412,306 statute miles at the time of touchdown, roughly the equivalent of 328 round trips to the moon and back. Sergey Prokopyev, in this, his second flight into space, will have logged a total of 568 days in space, 12th on the all-time list for most days by a human being in space. Of course, for Petelin and Rubio, this their first flight, they will come home with 371 days. This will be the third longest space flight in human history, right behind Valery Polyakov's 438 days in space on the Mir space station, and then right behind him, Russian cosmonaut Sergey Avdeyev, who spent 380 days in space on a particular mission.
Copy.
Meanwhile, in Kazakhstan, the Russian and NASA landing team has arrived by helicopter after a 2-hour flight from the staging city in Karaganda. They have arrived in Zhezkazgan, where their helicopters are being refueled. They will take off around the time of the deorbit burn for another 35-minute jaunt to the landing site itself, which is about 90 miles to the southeast of Zhezkazgan itself. The landing team, part of the Rosaviatsia search and recovery forces, will include a variety of helicopters as well as a Antonov fixed-wing aircraft, a large Antonov aircraft that will be used as a flying relay station for voice and data from the Soyuz spacecraft, that data and the voice to be relayed to the Russian flight controllers at the Russian Mission Control Center outside of Moscow. Once they arrive in the vicinity of the landing site, the helos will fly a circular racetrack pattern around the landing zone itself, waiting for the Soyuz to descend under its orange and white parachute for a touchdown, which again is scheduled at 6:17 a.m. Central Time, 7:17 a.m. Eastern Time. We're now just 13 minutes away from the undocking command that will begin the process of opening up the hooks, holding the Soyuz spacecraft to the International Space Station's Prishal module. During his final press conference a few days ago, Frank Rubio reflected back on his time aboard the International Space Station, an extended stay on the space station by about 6 months from its original 6-month duration. Let's listen to what Rubio said during that news conference.
This actually is my first mission, which is incredible at the fact that it just happened to last this long. You know, and it's been a mixed emotional roller coaster to a certain degree because personally it was an incredible challenge and it was difficult. Professionally, it was incredibly rewarding. It's a huge honor, and you know, it's a privilege to represent our office and our team this way. But overall, I think one thing that I've tried to do and hopefully have achieved, I certainly haven't done it perfectly, is just to kind of stay positive and stay steady throughout the mission. Despite the internal up and downs, you know, you try to just focus on the job and on the mission and remain steady, because ultimately every day you have to show up and do the work. And up here in this very unforgiving environment, we have to do things right. Again, we have an incredible ground team that backs us up, but as much as possible you try to bring your A game, because that's what the mission requires.
Frank Rubio talking about his extended stay on the station, and this was the view last December 14th when the original Soyuz that Rubio, Prokopyev, and Petelin launched on, the Soyuz MS-23 spacecraft, sprung a leak of its coolant system. Its coolant was depleted, and that forced the Russian officials and engineers to prepare a replacement Soyuz, the Soyuz MS-23, that was launched unpiloted back in February as a replacement for this vehicle. The damaged Soyuz MS-22 was undocked and deorbited, unpiloted, for a landing back in Kazakhstan, where it was recovered by Russian officials.
Altai, Moscow. Go ahead. Are you ready for undock? What's the pressure and temperature in the descent module? Temperature 14.1, pressure unintelligible.
So with the new Soyuz, the MS-23, all prepped, ready for undocking with the crew on board, again, Sergey Prokopyev, the Soyuz commander, is in the center seat of the descent module, flanked to his left by Dmitri Petelin and to his right by Frank Rubio. Just 9.5 minutes now until the undocking command is issued, and about 10.5 minutes until physical separation.
Monitor the timing. Copy. Not for you. And I need to press the button after you start, after the air starts, which is the dynamic mode enabled.
Meanwhile, the International Space Station is currently flying over India at an altitude of 260 statute miles, moving from southwest to northeast in an orbit inclined 51.6 degrees to either side of the equator. About 45 minutes ago, Flight Director Chris Dobbins here in the International Space Station Flight Control Room, who is standing in your field of view. At the lower right-hand corner of your screen is Flight Director Nicole McElroy, and at the top of your screen is astronaut Aki Hoshide, a veteran of Soyuz flights to the International Space Station. Dobbins took a poll of his flight controllers a short time ago, and everything was in readiness. He received a go across the board for the undocking of the Soyuz MS-23 that will begin the trip home for Rubio, Prokopyev, and Petelin.
Standing by.
Now just 7.5 minutes until the undocking command is issued. The Russian flight controllers at the Russian Mission Control Center in Korolyov will give their final go about a minute before that undocking command is sent. Over the past couple of hours, the crew on board the Soyuz conducted leak checks of the docking interface between Soyuz and the Prishal module. They also conducted their leak checks of each of their Sokol launch and entry suits. Everything was checked out in good shape. Communications has been checked out. And again, the Rosaviatsa search and recovery teams, the NASA and Russian landing team, they are in the town of Zhezkazgan. Their helos are being refueled, and they'll be ready to take off for the landing site itself at the time of the deorbit burn, which is about 2 hours and 45 minutes from now. But first things first, and that will be the undocking of the Soyuz and the departure of Frank Rubio, Sergey Prokopyev, and Dmitri Petelin.
We approach in the
During the time that they spent on orbit of more than a year in space, this departing crew saw the arrival of 15 visiting vehicles and the departure of 14 visiting vehicles. Their spacecraft, moments from now, will be the 15th vehicle to depart the station during Expedition 69 during their time on orbit.
58, respectively in both. Copy. And the pressure in the tanks is also as expected. Ignat, say it one more time. Which parameter? Locks in section 112.18.5 and second 18.1, fuel 17.4 and 17.1. Copy. Proceed your prep steps for undock.
Включаю фото. Инструкция запрета КВ есть?
EKV, infrared horizon center inhibit.
Now just 5 minutes away from the issuance of the undocking command to open the hooks holding Soyuz to the Prishal module. Again, that'll take about 90 seconds to complete. That'll be followed by physical separation scheduled at 2:54 and 30 seconds a.m. Central Time, 3:54 and 30 seconds a.m. Eastern Time.
Есть однократная пересветка.
Yes, we have. AGC mode. One time.
D2.
D2 not eliminated. Combined power.
And now, as the International Space Station flies over southwestern China, a view of Soyuz MS-23, poised to depart the International Space Station just about 5.5 minutes from now.
10:52:00. Activate SSVP. 10:52:00. SSVP on.
A good view of the three-sectioned Soyuz spacecraft. At the very top of your screen is the instrumentation and propulsion module with the solar arrays deployed. The center section is where the crew is strapped into their seats. That's the descent module, the only component that survives the heat of reentry to bring the crew home. And at the very top of the Soyuz, mated still for another couple of minutes to the Prishal module, that's the orbital module. Once physical separation occurs, the thrusters on the Soyuz will fire in two separate separation burns to open a separation rate from the International Space Station to an ultimate distance of about 90 miles from the station for the deorbit burn later this morning. 2.5 minutes now until the undocking command. This long journey for Frank Rubio, Sergey Prokopyev, and Dmitri Petelin about to enter its final lap.
Подготовил D7.
D7 is ready. Copy.
Now just 90 seconds until the issuance of the undocking command. This is the view from the external camera on the Soyuz MS-23. You're looking at the docking target on the Prokopyev module.
Подходит время 10:52.
10:52:00.
Выдал команду D7.
D7 sent. D7 eliminated. D11 eliminated. D15, G17, S13 all eliminated. TS8 mechanical capture confirmed.
Переходим на 42-ю страницу.
Going to page 42. On your go, ready to send the undock command.
15 seconds away from the undocking command.
To open the hooks. Moscow. D17 is armed. We're approaching the T-undock. 10:52:00. Sending D17. Hooks are open. S11.
The undocking command has been issued. The Soyuz hooks are driving. Again, this will take a little less than 90 seconds to complete, resulting in physical separation of the Soyuz from the Prokopyev module.
Monitoring the separation. There are no debris. On the interface, okay?
Just about 30 seconds until physical separation. Undocking confirmed. Physical separation confirmed at 2:54 a.m. Central Time, 3:54 a.m. Eastern Time, as the International Space Station flew over southeastern Mongolia. Frank Rubio, Sergey Prokopyev, and Dmitri Petelin have departed the complex that has been their home for over a year.
Unintelligible.
Next up, in about 2.5 minutes, the first separation burn to increase the opening rate between the Soyuz and the station. That'll be an 8-second burn of the Soyuz engines
Please repeat, Ignat.
with an opening rate of about 0.53 meters per second.
Да, запустился и...
Inaudible.
Да, и так запустили.
Yes, we send the command but inaudible, both from the control panel. And the indicator is no longer illuminated.
A very smooth, clean separation by the Soyuz MS-23, a great view as it flies over Mongolia. On board, Frank Rubio, Sergey Prokopyev, and Dmitri Petelin, wrapping up 371 days in space and the third longest space flight in human history.
Firing in manual mode.
МКС ЦУПу Москвы ВСГ-1 для Олега по КВД.
Station Moscow, Antrix 11 for Oleg on КВД.
По плюс X, положение закрыто.
КВД УМТК goes into close position
Depot firing
on
confirmed.
the X-axis. Copy.
Ten seconds.
We're about 10 seconds away from the first of the two separation burns for Soyuz.
Confirmed. Copy. 8 seconds.
And a good separation one burn reported. Russian flight controllers watching the Soyuz depart the International Space Station. Now in a roll program to orient itself for the second separation burn that is scheduled at 2:58 and 50 seconds Central Time.
GSO confirmed.
The second separation burn coming up will be a bit longer, 15 seconds in duration.
Second burn.
A 1.62 meter per second burn to increase that opening rate.
The engine thrusters will be fired for 15 seconds.
Uh, 10 seconds.
10 seconds before the burn. No, did you say 10 or 15 seconds of firing? 15, okay.
Есть работа ДПО.
Depot firing confirmed. 5 seconds. 10 seconds. 15 seconds.
And the second separation burn has initiated
No GSO.
and is complete after 15 seconds. Two good separation burns from the Soyuz as it begins to accelerate away from the International Space Station, undocking occurring on time at 2:54 and 30 seconds a.m. Central Time, 3:54 and 30 seconds a.m. Eastern Time, as the Soyuz and the International Space Station flew 260 miles over Mongolia.
Okay, stand by. Noise, can't copy.
This view now from the Soyuz external crosshaired engineering camera as it begins to quicken its departure away from the International Space Station.
Так, В-18 выдаем, правильно?
Okay, shall I send V-18? Yes, go ahead. Okay, Vizir причал off. Okay, all right. Work page 44. We do have the instruction here for the
1, 2, 3, не горит, акселерометр не горит, надув.
accelerometer is off. The pressurization is off.
И1 горит за динамического режима.
E1 indicator is illuminated. Dynamic mode inhibit. Copy.
This view of the control panel in the Soyuz with the external camera view, that is the same view that the crew on board Soyuz is seeing. Sergey Prokopyev in the center seat, flanked to his left by Dmitri Petelin, and to his right by NASA's Frank Rubio.
Deactivating the light, working on SSVP, docking internal transfer system. Light is off, OFF.
ССВП.
Now SSVP, docking and internal transfer system.
Выдаю D8 команду отключения ССВП.
SSVP to off, D8 command, D11, D17 not illuminated, and G17 not illuminated.
Параметры КДУ 150.
KDU parameters 158, 1 and 2. And I have 4, 5, 6.
Перехожу в РОДК.
Going to AeroDK. Manual attitude control with a digital loop.
Перевожу. Включаю команду orient.
Okay, sending the command AeroOrient.
Принято, руль убираю, транспортная. Иду на формат ТВ.
Making selection and going to BVS display.
As you can hear, the Russian flight controllers informing the crew on board the Soyuz under the call sign of Altai.
The TV system.
Altai is Sergey Prokopiev's call sign, named after the mountainous region in Russia located in southern Siberia.
1103.
Those commands are updating parameters for the upcoming deorbit burn that will take place just a few hours from now. That deorbit burn scheduled at 5:28 or 5:24 and 9 seconds. 5:24 and 9 seconds a.m. Central Time, 6:24 and 9 seconds a.m. Eastern Time.
Принято по 48.
Copy page 48. Certain 2140 accelerometer activation, and it will be via command radio line. And now you may prepare
Принято.
to work per page 48. You may rest for a few short moments.
At this point, the crew will have a bit of free time as they prepare for the deorbit burn and their ultimate descent back into the Earth's atmosphere.
So how is it going?
Второй раз вы видите ее.
Well, it's not the first time.
Но этой раз был больше. Это лучше.
Well, it's going even better.
Good view of the departing Soyuz. Sergey Prokopyev reporting that the crew is feeling well. Everything in good shape on board the MS-23. This spacecraft was launched back in February, unpiloted, made an automated docking to the International Space Station as the replacement for the damaged Soyuz MS-22 spacecraft that incurred a coolant leak back in December of last year, rendering it unusable for the crew to return to Earth in.
Иллюминатора не видно? Нет, здесь у меня уже...
Can you see me in the window? No, it's in the shade.
Да. На ТС-4 загорелся признак спуск.
Inaudible.
Так, Сергей, ну ты считаешь, что камера GoPro работает, да?
Sergey, the GoPro camera is still operating. Is it correct?
As the Soyuz undocked from the International Space Station, the NASA and Russian landing team, embedded with the Rosaviatsa search and recovery forces, are taking a breather at the airport in Zhezkazgan, which is the intermediary staging site. The NASA Russian landing team flew by helicopters from Karaganda to Zhezkazgan a couple of hours ago. Those helicopters have been refueled and will take off in sequential fashion for the landing site to recover Rubio, Prokopyev, and Petelin. The helos will be wheels up around the time of the deorbit burn, which again is scheduled at 5:24 and 9 seconds a.m. Central Time, 6:24 and 9 seconds a.m. Eastern Time. You're looking at a live view from a balcony camera at the Russian Mission Control Center in Korolyov outside of Moscow. Russian flight controllers carefully monitoring all of the Soyuz systems and talking to Soyuz Commander Sergey Prokopyev aboard the Soyuz MS-23 as it continues its departure away from the International Space Station following its undocking a short time ago at 5:24 a.m. Central Time, 6:24 a.m. Eastern Time. The undocking that occurred a short time ago was nominal. Everything went by the book. The separation of the Soyuz from the Prashal module occurred over Mongolia. Again, that occurred at 2:54 a.m. Central Time, 3:54 a.m. Eastern Time. That was followed just a few minutes later by a pair of separation burns from the Soyuz thrusters to increase the opening rate between the Soyuz and the International Space Station that will culminate in a distance of about 38 kilometers away from the International Space Station for the deorbit burn that is scheduled at 5:24 and 9 seconds a.m. Central Time, 6:24 and 9 seconds a.m. Eastern Time. The deorbit burn that is upcoming to begin the trip back home in earnest for Rubio, Prokopyev, and Petelin. That deorbit burn will be 4 minutes, 39 seconds in duration, slowing the Soyuz down by 128 meters per second, allowing it to drop out of orbit for its descent back into the Earth's atmosphere. "27 minutes after the deorbit burn, pyros will fire to enable the three sections of the Soyuz to separate from one another. The module separation scheduled at 5:51 and 58 seconds a.m. Central Time, 6:51:58 Eastern Time. The only portion of the Soyuz that survives with the crew on board is the descent module, the center section. Its direction of travel will have the heat shield pointed in the direction of travel toward the landing site to repel heat that will build up around the Soyuz of about 2,500 degrees Fahrenheit during peak heating. The Soyuz will hit the top of the Earth's atmosphere, the point called entry interface, at an altitude of about 100 kilometers or 62 miles in altitude at 5:54:51 Central Time, 6:54:51 Eastern Time. Temperatures around the spacecraft again will build at that point. They will enter into a regime of plasma that will be generated around the spacecraft, ionization, if you will, that should prevent communications from being conducted between the Soyuz and flight controllers in Korolyov outside of Moscow. That plasma regime will last for about 5 minutes or so. They will emerge from the plasma regime and have maximum G loads building up on their bodies of about 4 to 5 Gs during their descent into and through the atmosphere. The command to open up the chutes will occur at an altitude of 6.7 miles at 6:03 and 13 seconds a.m. Central Time, 7:03 and 13 seconds a.m. Eastern Time. This parachute deployment sequence that you'll be seeing later on this morning is triggered by a pressure sensor at an altitude of 41,000 feet. At this point, the main parachute cover is jettisoned by pyros and springs, pulling out 2 extraction chutes, which in turn pulls out the drogue chute and in turn pulls out the main chute. This takes about 20 seconds for all of this to happen. Then, at an altitude of 21,000 feet, a pressure sensor starts a timer that triggers most of the remaining events in the landing sequence. At an altitude of just 18,000 feet, the commands will be issued to jettison the heat shield. That's about 3 minutes after the parachutes are deployed. That command also inhibits the entry thrusters and opens valves to vent all of the hydrogen peroxide fuel for the entry thrusters and the oxygen in the life support system tank. The white vapor that you have seen on occasion during an entry of a Soyuz vehicle for landing, and what we hope we'll see, assuming we have television from the landing site at that time, that white vapor is a combination of hydrogen peroxide and oxygen venting into the air. The purpose of that venting is to safe the vehicle for landing so that the search and recovery forces don't encounter any hazardous gases to remain in the tanks when they approach the vehicle following touchdown, thus facilitating their ability to extract the crew from the spacecraft in the shortest time possible. So to recap, the undocking of the Soyuz MS-23 spacecraft occurred on time at 2:54 and 30 seconds a.m. Central Time, 3:54 and 30 seconds a.m. Eastern Time, as the Soyuz and the International Space Station flew 260 miles over Mongolia. All of the events leading up to undocking were executed in flawless fashion, as was the undocking itself, followed by 2 separation burns from the Soyuz engines to accelerate its departure rate away from the International Space Station. Frank Rubio, Sergey Prokopyev, the Soyuz commander, and Dmitri Petelin bid farewell to the facility that has been their home for over a year. They are heading for a landing in south-central Kazakhstan at 6:17 a.m. Central Time, 7:17 a.m. Eastern Time, which will be 5:17 p.m. at the landing site, about 90 miles to the southeast of the town of Zhezkazgan, Kazakhstan. So we'll be back in a couple of hours with our deorbit burn and landing coverage for you, starting at 5 a.m. Central, 6 a.m. Eastern Time, and we'll be on the air through the time the crew is extracted from the Soyuz vehicle and brought into the medical tent nearby. We'll have more details about that recovery operation when we return at 5 a.m. Central, 6 a.m. Eastern Time for our deorbit burn and landing coverage for Frank Rubio, Sergey Prokopyev, and Dmitri Petelin. In the meantime, this is Mission Control Houston.